UFC 325 is right around the corner, and today I'm going to be breaking down and picking the winner for the majority of the fights on the card. We're going to start with the early prelims, we're going to end with the main event, and I just wanted to say one thing before we start. We've got a handful of road to UFC fights on this card, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't really know too much about these guys, so we're just going to go ahead and skip past these and get on with the breakdown, starting with Khan Offley versus Yi Zha. Yeah! Now, we're not going to waste too much time on this fight because I don't think many people care about it. It's kind of a tit-for-tat fight. I think ultimately Khan Offley's going to win, in my opinion. Even though he is the underdog in this one, I just think Yi Zha is relatively untested in the UFC at this point. He's only beaten Weston Wilson, who went 3-1 in the UFC before getting cut. Before that, he lost a decision against Gabriel Santos. And prior to that, he won by round 1 armbar against Kaiwan Lee. And that was part of the Road to UFC series as well. So in terms of what we've seen in the actual UFC and in the organization, relatively untested. On the flip side, when you look at the underdog Khan Offley, he has gone 2-1 in the UFC. He's obviously got those 2 wins that he won on the Ultimate Fighter, one of them coming against Nathan Fletcher. But in the UFC, he's fought Myron Santos, Mohamed Naimov, and Ricardo Ramos. He lost to the first 2, but he beat Ricardo Ramos by rear naked choke in the first round, which I think is an underrated win considering how explosive Ricardo Ramos is. Ricardo Ramos is dangerous. He's dangerous in the first round. He might become significantly less dangerous after the first round has passed, but Khan Offley beat him in the first round by rear naked choke. We're not going to spend too much time on this fight. I am taking Khan Offley. I'm taking the underdog, and I'm taking the underdog by submission in the first round. Khan Offley is going to get the submission in the first round. The new UFC bonus format is encouraging people to hump finishes. Once again, I'm going to mention the fact that Laura Sanko has said that the UFC are prioritizing violence this year, and it goes hand in hand with the fact that they've just rolled out the new bonus scheme. I think this is going to be a pretty manic first round, and I can see Khan Offley pulling off the submission. We're going Khan Offley, submission, round 1, rear naked choke. He's got a handful of rear naked choke submissions in his career, and I think he's going to get another one against Yi Zha. And we're going to be moving straight on to the next fight, which is our boy fuck off. And we're going to be moving on to the next fight of the card, which is Jonathan McAuliffe versus Oban Elliott. Our boy Oban Elliott is going to be fighting. He's back. Oban Elliott is returning. And he's returning against Jonathan McAuliffe. Now, both of these guys are really underrated fighters. McAuliffe is fresh off of a debut win against Kevin Doucette, where he actually came in as a plus 170 underdog. Ended up putting a beating on Kevin Doucette and came away with a unanimous decision win. And before that, he won on the Contender Series by round 1 triangle choke against Mohamed Ado. Now, what I do find interesting is McAuliffe was matched up against Oban Elliott back in September 2025. And when they made that matchup, he was a plus 105 underdog. Bear in mind that neither of these guys have fought since, and now that they're matched up again, McAuliffe is showing as a minus 145 favourite. On the flip side, we've got Oban Elliott, who is looking to bounce back against a unanimous decision loss that he took against Sok Hyung Ko back in June 2025. Now, before that, he beat Bassil Hafez in a very underrated fight. He ended up finishing him in round 3. Both of these guys are really, really well-rounded. Both of these guys can fight late, and both of these guys can finish a fight. I think if we're comparing UFC wins, I'm not trying to be biased here, but I think a win over Bassil Hafez, finishing him in the 3rd round, is a little bit more impressive than a win over Kevin Doucette, who is now faded off into obscurity somewhere in the PFL. And I think coming into this fight with a chip on his shoulder, I think Oban Elliott's going to be able to beat Jonathan McAuliffe. I can see this one getting really scrappy, and I can see this one most likely going to a decision. And if I'm picking a side, I'm going with Oban Elliott. I think Oban Elliott's going to be a little bit too much for Jonathan McAuliffe at this stage in his career. He's got a handful of more fights under his belt professionally. And although McAuliffe is showing us a favourite, I think Oban Elliott is going to be a little bit too much, a little bit too soon. We're going with Oban Elliott. We're going to go with Oban Elliott by decision. And that takes us on to the next fight on the card, which is Jacob Malkoun versus Torres Scared to Fight Finney. Now, as I said, Torres Finney is scared to fight. Torres Finney has shown a lack of engagement in a lot of his fights, especially in his recent fight against Robert Valentin. He just looked like he didn't want to engage in any striking sequences, and a lot of the time he just found himself pushing Valentin against the cage and just weighing on him like a wet blanket. He looked like he was scared to engage in any of the striking sequences, and it just ended up being a complete snooze fest where Torres Finney won, but in the eyes of the fans, he lost. He won the fight, but his stock dropped. And it looks like he's probably going to try the same approach when he fights Malkoun in this one. Now, one thing to mention is he has got a very well-aged win against Cam Ralston, who is also fighting this card. We're going to get onto him in a minute. But once again, it's just that boring, grinding style of wrestling that the UFC are clearly not liking at the moment, which is also probably the reason why they made Torres Finney have 1,073 fights on the Contender Series before they signed him. And when we look on the flip side, you've got Jacob Malkoun. Now, Jacob Malkoun has a win over Andre Petroski. He has a win over Nick Maximov, who, in my opinion, are both higher level fighters than Torres Finney. Maximov is a better grappler, and Petroski is a better wrestler. And Malkoun beat both. He KO'd Petroski with his hip. I do think this is a relatively even fight, but if we're considering where this event is taking place in Australia and the fact that Torres Finney is going to have to change his body clock, he's going to have to readjust for a lot of things, and on the side of Malkoun, he hasn't got to change a lot of things. He's fighting with a hometown crowd. And we're going to give him the advantage here. I don't know if he's going to get a finish against Finney, but I can see him landing enough damage to get the nod on the scorecards. We're going Jacob Malkoun. We're going Jacob Malkoun. Late finish, but probably going to be a decision, in my own opinion. And on that note, we move on to the next fight, which is Cam Rowston versus Cody Brundage. And talking about Andre Petroski, Cam Rowston finished Andre Petroski in the first round. During that fight, he was landing some heavy leg kicks. And in this fight, he's going to have a significant reach advantage. I think for Cody Brundage to win this fight, he has to get on the inside, he has to land a heavy punch, or he's going to have to get a takedown. And against Cam Rowston, I just don't see that happening. Brundage can be a very stationary fighter, and I can just see Cam Rowston taking advantage of that. Chopping the legs early, stopping Brundage from getting any early on momentum. And if you look at Cody Brundage's wins in the UFC, every single one of his UFC wins have come by round 1 finish. The question is he going to get a round 1 finish against Cam Rowston? I don't think so. I think Andre Petroski is a better wrestler than Cody Brundage, and Rowston dismantled him before he could get any of his grappling off. And I think it's going to be a very similar situation with Brundage. And I think if this doesn't end in the first round, we're going to see Rowston cruise his way to a damage-based decision here, or a late finish. Depending on how much Brundage fades in this fight is dependent on how Rowston wins, in my opinion. And I don't think it's crazy to say that we see a Rowston submission here. He's got 7 professional submissions and Cody Brundage is going to be shooting. Rowston's got those long limbs and I can see a scenario where he wraps up a choke when Brundage is shooting in for a takedown. I'm going Cam Rowston to win in round 2, whether it's a submission or strikes. I can see round 1 being a bit of a feeling out process where Brundage fails on a lot of his grappling advances. And I think Rowston rallies back in round 2 to get either a TKO or a submission if Brundage is shooting sloppy. We're going to go with Cam Rowston, round 2 finish. That is going to be the pick. Moving swiftly on to the next fight, we have got Junior Tafa versus Billy Elikana. Now, this is going to be an exciting fight because I'm a big fan of Billy Elikana. And Billy Elikana is a really underrated fighter. He's not on the radar for a lot of fans yet, but I have no doubt that in the future he will be. Now, this fight is pretty simple to break down, in my opinion. Junior Tafa, he's pretty shit. However, he's not that bad at stand-up. And believe it or not, he has got a win over the GOAT, Parker Porter. Landed a right hook in round 1 of their fight and he shut his lights out. And trust me, a win over Parker Porter, that ain't bad on your CV. He's gone 2-4 in the UFC. And he's lost 2 of those by submission. Now, Billy Elikana showed in his last fight against Kevin Christian that he is a very, very good grappler. He's only got 2 professional submission wins in his career, but he submitted Kevin Christian with absolute ease. And I understand that Kevin Christian's a nobody at this stage, but 5 out of his 9 professional wins are by submission. This guy knew how to grapple. Another thing to note here is that Junior Tafa's main method to victory here would be to knock out Billy Elikana. But Billy Elikana fought Ibo Aslan, and he beat Ibo Aslan by unanimous decision. And in that fight, it was a plus 255 underdog. In my opinion, if Junior Tafa doesn't knock out Billy Elikana, it's wraps. He's going to get shown levels in the grappling, and the likelihood is that he's going to get shown levels in the striking. I think this is a pretty clear-cut Billy Elikana win here. He's coming into this fight as a minus 220 favourite, and I think that's justified. I think Billy Elikana is going to come like a bat out of hell, and I think he's going to get the round 1 submission over Junior Tafa. Levels are going to be shown. Junior Tafa is going to get cut. Junior Tafa is going to go back to the Australian regional scene, and he can go and knock out a bunch of bums over there. Billy Elikana is going to be the pick, round 1 submission. Moving swiftly on, we got Quillan Salkiel versus Jamie Malarkey. What the fuck is going on? Seriously, what the fuck is going on? Jamie Malarkey is getting sent in for slaughter and they're doing it in front of his home crowd. The UFC are being pretty fucking brutal in here. Quillan Salkiel is coming as a minus 850 favourite. What's the point in this fight? Why could we not get someone else for Quillan Salkiel to fight in Australia? You know what I mean? We couldn't get a ranked fighter to fight Quillan Salkiel. What's Manuel Torres doing right now, bro? Quillan Salkiel just fucking head kick KO'd Nasrat Haqparast. And the best that we can do is give him Jamie Malarkey. Seriously, are we trying to build up these prospects or are we just going to throw cans at them? This could end really, really badly. I did say Andre Puliev was going in as a lamb to be slaughtered against Tabor Gaultier last weekend and we saw how that went. So, you never know. Malarkey could hang in there for all 3 rounds and end up putting on a pretty good display of himself. Ultimately, is that going to happen? I think not. I think Quillan Salkiel is going to win this fight extremely convincingly. In the UFC alone, if you're looking at his fights, discounting the Anshul Jabli fight because that one's just a fucking alley-oop for any fighter who faces him at this stage. Salkiel has fought Yanao Ashmouz and Nasrat Haqparast. And I think these are 2 of the more underrated fighters in the lightweight division. Both Ashmouz and Haqparast are not on a lot of people's radars, but the hardcore fans will know what I'm talking about when I say that these are 2 very, very underrated wins. beat Yanao moves by unanimous decision, head kicked Nasrat Haqparast in round 1. His family own a fucking bakery. And the UFC have decided to give him a massive step down in Jamie Mullarkey. Ultimately, the pick's going to be fucking Quill and Salkiel by any way he wants. I think Jamie Mullarkey's going to be able to tough it out in round 1, only to get finished by a fucking flush head kick in round 2. He's going to land heavy in the first round. He's going to finish up heavy in the second round. Jamie Mullarkey's only just going to make it out of the first round, only to crumble under the pressure of Salkiel in round 2. And we see another Quill and Salkiel highlight reel finish. RIP Jamie Mullarkey, it was nice while it lasted. Quill and Salkiel round 2 KO is going to be the pick. Moving on. We got Tai Tuivasa versus Talison Teixeira. Now, Tai Tuivasa has been out for some time. Almost 2 years to be exact. And I don't know if you've been following his Instagram, but in that time, he's been getting fat. He's been getting fatter, should I say. We've seen videos of him partying. We've seen videos of his new cabbage business. And although Talison Teixeira just lost by knockout against Derek Lewis, who is another heavy power puncher, I think that was an early stoppage. And I know in that fight everyone wanted Derek Lewis to win, but if you look at that stoppage, I love Jason Herzog, but that was a fucking early stoppage. Talison Teixeira was back on his feet, he was coherent, and he was aware of what was going on at the time. When we look at the fight styles of these two, Talison Teixeira is pretty fast considering he's 6'7", and I think the easiest path to victory for Talison Teixeira in this one is to keep Tai Tuivasa at range. Tai Tuivasa needs to get into the pocket to land his big shots. He relies on being in the pocket to score his KOs, and with an 8-inch reach advantage, is Talison Teixeira even going to let him get close to that? I don't think so. The main argument is that Tai Tuivasa is similar to Derek Lewis in the fact that he throws heavy and when he lands, it's devastating. But people seem to be forgetting that before that, Talison Teixeira fought Justin Tafa, another heavy power puncher, and he finished him in 35 seconds of the first round. Teixeira has fought 3 times since Tai Tuivasa was last in there. And without overthinking this one, Tai Tuivasa has been out for almost 2 years. He's on a 5-fight losing streak. In his time out, he's been partying and growing plants. And when we package that all up, I just see Talison Teixeira bouncing back from his KO loss against Derek Lewis with a KO win against Tai Tuivasa. The main weakness in Teixeira at this stage would be his grappling. He's a devastating striker. And are we all of a sudden going to see Tai Tuivasa Nurmagomedov? I don't think so. Talison Teixeira keeps Tai Tuivasa at range. Talison Teixeira stings Tai Tuivasa at range. And Talison Teixeira finishes Tai Tuivasa before he can get in range. He's had too long out of the game. He's lost all momentum that he once upon a time had when he was walking out to fucking Barbie doll and girls just want to have fun. And Talison Teixeira has only just turned 26 years old. He's young in the game. He's still learning. The saying that goes, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, works in this favour. What new wrinkle in Tai Tuivasa's game are we going to see? Because I don't think we're going to see anything different to what we normally see. And if anything, it's fairly obvious to say that we're going to see a significantly decreased level of skill when it comes to Tai Tuivasa. He's been out of the game for so long. Not to mention that this guy probably made good money when he was on top of his game, even when he was losing fights. Compare that to a young, hungry prospect who's got a chip on his shoulder after just being KO'd in an early stoppage. I know no one really gave a fuck because he wasn't the hero in that matchup, but Talison Teixeira's coming back with a vengeance and he's KOing Tai Tuivasa. I think Tai Tuivasa is going to be a shell of himself in this fight and I think it's going to end early. I think Talison Teixeira is going to knock him out in the first round. Talison Teixeira, round 1 knockout, that is the pick. And we move on to what seems like, on paper, is the most dynamic fight on this card. Rafael Fiziev versus Mauricio Ruffy. Woo! This one's good, boys. This one's good. This one's real good. Rafael Fiziev versus Mauricio Ruffy is 100% one of those Mortal Kombat fights. We had it with Yuri versus Khalil. We had it with a bunch of other fights over the years. But this fight just seems like it's going to deliver. And we've got a few things to note in this actual fight. First and foremost being Mauricio Ruffy has kind of left the fighting nerds. I know he's still in their circle and whatever, but Mauricio Ruffy has been signed by Engage, which is the same company that works alongside Volkanovski, Israel Adesanya, and a bunch of other Anzac fighters. And I think this is going to be a massively beneficial partnership with Ruffy working alongside Alexander Volkanovski. And obviously after losing to Benoit Saint Denis back in September, Ruffy is going to have been working on his wrestling, and who better to train with than Alexander Volkanovski? What's also significant about the partnership with Alexander Volkanovski is the fact that they're both working on the same timelines. They're both training together, they're both doing their camps together, and I think through training with Volkanovski, we're going to see a significantly improved Mauricio Ruffy, both in the grappling and the overall well-roundedness of his game. I think a main issue for Fiziev in this fight is going to be the fact that he prioritizes counter-striking as means to win. His favourite strike is his body kick, but I think the level of striking that Mauricio Ruffy has, I can see a scenario where he looks to counter one of those body kicks. And Fiziev does get hit. I know he's a striking coach at Tiger Muay Thai, but he gets hit. And he's been hit in all of his recent fights. He's been hit against Bahamondes. He got hit multiple times in the 2 fights against Justin Gaethje, which he lost. The Gamrot fight ended with a weird injury, but up until that point, he was getting landed on. And the main example that I want to point out is his fight against Bobby Green. I think Fiziev is a very impulsive fighter. And in his fights, when he starts to show signs of adversity, a lot of the time it just seems like he throws his game plan out of the window. And I think in this fight against Mauricio Ruffy, he is going to face adversity. He is going to struggle with the reach of Mauricio Ruffy. And unless he mixes up the grappling, this is going to be a pure stand-up fight. Fiziev showed no real signs of trying to grapple when he fought Justin Gaethje. And Justin Gaethje beat him on the feet. If Fiziev decides to wrestle in this fight, I can see him imposing his physicality on Ruffy and maybe having some success. But I just don't think his ego is going to let him do that. I think Fiziev is going to want to prove himself to be the better striker in this fight. And I think that's going to be his downfall. Now, whether or not Ruffy lands a KO shot, I'm not too sure. But if Fiziev refuses to implement some sort of grappling strategy here, I just don't see a way that he can win. And even saying that, even if Fiziev tries to grapple, I'm not saying Fiziev's a better grappler than Ruffy. Ruffy's very clearly the more dynamic grappler. I mean, we saw against Jamie Mullarkey that switch sweep takedown that he did before knocking him out. I think this is going to be a pretty sad passing of the torch fight. And I think it's sad because Fiziev hasn't really even shown his full potential in the UFC. The problem is that his next fight is against Mauricio Ruffy. And I think on the side of Fiziev, this is going to be a very ego-based fight. And I think ultimately he's going to lose. He's going to get frustrated that Mauricio Ruffy is landing the better shots. And tell me you can't see a scenario that rather than grappling, Fiziev just decides to showboat, almost kind of Michael Chandler-esque, and then just loses the fight anyway by decision. I think he's probably got sound enough striking defense to not get KO'd brutally. And I think because of that, we're going to see a pretty redeeming performance from Mauricio Ruffy. Kind of similar to how Peyton Talbot just had against Henry Cejudo. Ultimately, my pick is going to be Mauricio Ruffy by unanimous decision, showing levels to Rafael Fiziev in the striking. I think it's going to be pretty sad watching Fiziev lose at the one game that he prides himself most on. Mauricio Ruffy, unanimous decision, is going to be the pick. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we've got Dan Hooker versus Benoit Saint Denis. Now, there was a time that Benoit Saint Denis was looking like he wasn't really going to fucking float in the UFC. The loss to Dustin Poirier was kind of discounted because he had a staph infection. But then directly after, he got beasted by Renato Moicano, where the fight was stopped by the doctors in the second round. I think from that point forward, a lot of people were writing him off. But then he went 3-0, beating Carl Prepolek, Mauricio Ruffy, who will have just fought at this point, and Beneil Dariush, where he flatlined him in 16 seconds. I think a comparison that a lot of people are doing in regards to this fight is Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot. And I just want to pump the brakes on that because when Mateusz Gamrot gets people down, he doesn't keep them down. He's a chain wrestler, he continuously moves, and he fights very similar to Merab. Although he gets takedowns, a lot of the time he doesn't do anything with them and he's just using it to score. Now, Dan Hooker did well in that fight. He ended up winning against Mateusz Gamrot. However, in the first round, there was 2 significant moments where Gamrot had him in threatening submission positions. Now, Dan Hooker did manage to get out of those positions, but I would favour Benoit Saint Denis to do a lot more if he was in those positions as well. Now, Benoit Saint Denis has previously shown weakness in his stand-up, but if he manages to get Dan Hooker down, especially early in the fight, I think it's wraps. And Benoit Saint Denis is an incredibly dangerous fighter in the first round. He's an incredibly underrated fighter in the first round. And before Dustin Poirier KO'd him, when he had staph, when he was on antibiotics, and when he clearly suffered from exhaustion in that fight, he was having real success in the grappling department against Dustin Poirier. I mean, we all saw the moment where Benoit Saint Denis had his back and Dustin Poirier was doing this fucking cartoon-like spinning punches to the back. But Benoit had his back. And shortly after that, he beat Marc Diakiese in the main event of a grappling event in France. I know it's Marc Diakiese, but it's still a win in the grappling world. Dan Hooker's now 35 years old, just lost by arm triangle by Arman Tsarukyan in the second round. And although he beat Mateusz Gamrot, he won by split decision. It was a gritty fight where he continuously had to defend the grappling of Mateusz Gamrot. I think this is going to be a very grapple-heavy fight. And if Dan Hooker isn't able to pop up like he did when he fought Mateusz Gamrot, then Benoit Saint Denis is going to find that finish. He's going to submit Dan Hooker. I know a lot of people are using the Gamrot fight as a comparison to this one, but if you look past the win he has against Gamrot, within the last 5 years, Dan Hooker has only got wins against Jalen Turner and Claudio Puelles. The win against Jalen Turner was a split decision, and it's fucking Claudio Puelles. You know what I mean? He got ragdolled and finished by Arman Tsarukyan, and I think he's going to get ragdolled and finished by Benoit Saint Denis. I'm a big Dan Hooker fan, but I think it's going to be a Benoit Saint Denis round 1 submission. Arman Tsarukyan took him to round 2, but Arman Tsarukyan wanted to fuck him up. I genuinely think we see Benoit Saint Denis get it done in the first round, and I think we see Benoit Saint Denis go 4-0 within a calendar year. BSD's on a streak, the momentum will continue. I think he's going to submit Dan Hooker in the first round. Round 1 submission by Benoit Saint Denis is going to be the pick. We will be getting a title shot in 2026. Moving on to the main event of the evening. We have got the rematch between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. What a fucking fight. I'm so excited for this fight. I understand the reasoning. People don't want to see Lopes fight for the title straight after he's just fought Alexander Volkanovski. People want to see Lerone Murphy fight. People want to see Movsar Evloev fight. Although Movsar hasn't fought in a million years at this point, so can we just axe him out of the conversation here? I know he's got the numbers, but where's the activity? Nevertheless, we got Diego Lopes stepping in against Alexander Volkanovski for the featherweight title. And this is going to be another instant classic. And I think we're going to see a completely different game plan from Diego Lopes here. One thing that we learned about the first fight is that Diego Lopes doesn't have Alexander Volkanovski's number in the striking. Volkanovski took everything that Lopes had and he threw just as much back at him. The question is Lopes going to fight the same way in this fight? I don't think so. Something to note, in the first fight, Diego Lopes didn't shoot a single takedown. And I know that Volkanovski, low center of gravity, he's significantly shorter than Diego Lopes. He stuffed a whole load of takedowns from Islam Makhachev when they fought. So I don't necessarily see a scenario where Diego Lopes shoots on a takedown, gets him down with ease and then just works to a sub. But if Lopes can weaponize his aggression here, get to a clinch and find a trip, I can see a scenario where Volkanovski might leave himself a little bit open. I know it was a long time ago now, but when Alexander Volkanovski fought Brian Ortega, he found himself in positions where he was genuinely threatened by a lot of the submissions that Brian Ortega was trying to pull off on him. And I'm not saying at all that Diego Lopes is going to easily be able to take him down and submit him, but as I've said, we've seen Volk in those positions before. I also think that in the last fight between Diego Lopes and Alexander Volkanovski, the time where Lopes should have probably grappled was a time where it was too late at that point. He was already losing the fight. And Alexander Volkanovski was much fresher than him. And since Volkanovski and Lopes last fought, Diego Lopes fought Gene Silva. And in that fight, we saw Diego Lopes land 3 out of the 4 takedowns that he shot on Gene Silva. And when he got top position, he was raining down elbows, splitting Gene Silva open. And at the end of the fight, Gene Silva looked like a fucking tomato. I don't know, man. I just think it's not that unlikely that we see Diego Lopes completely shift his game plan, look to grapple early. And even if he gets off his grappling on Alexander Volkanovski and Volkanovski pops up, low center of gravity, shorter opponent, during the scrambles is where Diego Lopes finds all of his success. He finds a lot of success in the grappling during scrambles, and he finds a lot of success in striking during clinch breaks and directly after being tied up. Like we saw against Sadiq Youssef, like we saw against Brian Ortega. And I think previously in the fight that he had against Alexander Volkanovski, he was just trying to throw the kitchen sink at him from range. I just can't shake the feeling that if Diego Lopes manages to tie up Alexander Volkanovski in any way, shape or form, he could just land something heavy over the top and we could see a completely different shift in outcomes than what happened in the first fight. Volkanovski is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Volkanovski does have one of the deepest bags in MMA at the moment. And we could definitely see another repeat of what happened in the first fight. But when it comes to actually breaking the fight down, I don't want to just say, oh, the first fight is going to happen again. There's going to be no change. Alexander Volkanovski by decision. I want to explore other options here. And I genuinely do see an avenue where Diego Lopes can win this. I think a lot of MMA fans had basically just written off the first fight and saying, oh, Alexander Volkanovski mogged Diego Lopes. Alexander Volkanovski showed levels against Diego Lopes. It was a relatively even fight. I think after a round or so of Volk throwing that lead leg kick, popping out that jab, I think Diego Lopes is just going to say fuck it and go aggressive. I don't think the plan will be to span it out over 5 rounds because we've seen how that can go. And if he tries to do that, it might not go the same way as before, but the likelihood is that it probably is going to go that way. Alexander Volkanovski is just too good to simply try and dismantle over 5 rounds. And although I love Volk, I think a shift in game plan and an increase in aggression will get Diego Lopes a lot of success in this fight. Alexander Volkanovski shot 11 takedowns in their fight, and he only got 1 of them. And it's no secret to say that a partial reason why Volk won in the first fight is because he mixed it up so well. He was doing more. Diego Lopes was just trying to strike with him, and it wasn't working. And if Diego Lopes tries to strike with Volk again, it's probably not going to work. I don't think it's a secret to say that there's 2 most likely outcomes with this fight, right? It either goes the exact same as the first fight, and in which case Alexander Volkanovski shows levels while Diego Lopes is just trying to pick him from range, try and gets his shots off, ultimately has no success, but still doesn't shoot any takedowns. Or we see Diego Lopes implement some of his grappling that he had great success against names like Mauricio Ruffy, great success over Pat Sabatini, who is a well-renowned grappler. And the question to follow that is, if he does try and grapple, is he going to be able to get Volkanovski down? Is he going to be able to hold him down? And is he going to be able to find his way to a sub? And if you're asking me, I'm going to take the punt. I think Diego Lopes finds a submission in this fight. Call me crazy. I'm going out on a limb and saying that Diego Lopes might get a submission in this fight. And that's exactly what I'm going to side with. You know, Alexander Volkanovski isn't getting any younger. He's 37 years old now. And whether it's against Diego Lopes, Mauricio Ruffy, Gene Silva, Lerone Murphy, at some point Volk is going to slow down. And if we're going off what we've previously seen in this sport, it could come out of nowhere. And because of that reason, I'm not ruling out that it can happen in this fight against Diego Lopes. I know their last fight was only in September, but I would argue that Lopez's fight with Gene Silva that's happened since then will play a big part in regards to urgency and chaos that he can weaponize and that he should weaponize in this fight against Alexander Volkanovski. All in all, I am going to take Diego Lopes. I might be being a little bit biased. Diego Lopes is one of my favourite fighters, but we're picking him to win by submission. And I can see it happening second round, third round, one of the two. I think both fighters are going to ease themselves into the first round. I think they're going to get feeler for themselves. And I think after a bit of a rocket up the ass in Diego Lopes' corner after the first round, he's going to come out much more aggressive and he's going to look to implement his grappling straight away. And as I said, I'm going to take a punt in saying that he gets success in doing so. I'm going Diego Lopes, round 2 submission, and new. Set up the Lerone Murphy fight, man. I love Alexander Volkanovski, but all good things have to come to an end. And I think this rematch is going to be it. And I think that is a good way to end the video. So if you do agree with my picks, feel free to drop a like. If you disagree with my picks, feel free to drop me a comment and tell me why. And as always, I really, really appreciate you for watching. Thank you very much. Hope you're having an amazing day. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.